Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Keys to Successful Leadership in Radiology. Before I turn it over to our program co-chairs to get things started tonight, I want to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in tonight's event. As you can see, here's a screenshot of the attendee interface for this webinar. You should see something like this on your own computer desktop in your upper right-hand corner. When you joined today's webinar, you selected to either join by phone call or computer audio. If for some reason during the session you want to make that change or change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane, which is in the control panel. There will be time for Q&A at the end. You'll be able to either submit a question by typing it into the questions pane, or you can raise your hand, which you can see the little green arrow by the hand icon there, and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question to the panel. You can feel free to enter your questions at any time during tonight's webinar. We'll collect them and address them at the end. Lastly, if you find yourself having any sort of technical difficulties throughout, please let us know by typing into the questions pane and someone will assist you. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to introduce our program co-chairs, Dr. Frank Lexa and Dr. Lori Diet. Dr. Lexa, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, and thank you all for attending this program. We're very excited about the program. It's day one, and we also hope you'll be here tomorrow. We're going to be focusing on issues related to leadership and to wellness in the workplace. My name is Frank Lex. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the Radiology Leadership Institute at the American College of Radiology, and it's my pleasure to introduce my co-chair, Dr. Lori Diet, and she's the chair of the Commission on Publications and Lifelong Learning, and she is also a professor and vice chair at Vanderbilt University. Dr. Diet.
Thank you. And I also welcome you all to tonight's webinar. We're so happy you can be here. And I echo thanks, want to absolutely thank our ACR staff, our fabulous staff, and hope you enjoy the webinar tonight and invite you to come to tomorrow's webinar on promoting well-being. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Diet. And we have four tremendous faculty for you today. And I'm going to very briefly introduce them now, and then you'll also see from their slides many of their additional accomplishments. Our first speaker will be Dr. David Boyd. He is in practice at the Reston Radiology Consultants. We have Lucy Spoluto, and she's from Vanderbilt University. Dr. Rich Heller from Radiology Partners, and Dr. Ann Jay from Georgetown University Hospital. So we have a tremendous lineup for you tonight. And as Anne-Marie said, our title for today is, as part of Brave New Work, how to get ahead and meet leadership challenges in 2020 and beyond, we're going to be talking about keys to successful leadership in radiology. I'm going to create a baseline and go over some basic material in leadership and then turn it over to our four experts. And as I said earlier, I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the RLI. I'm an academic neuroradiologist and a business school professor. I have no disclosures, unfortunately, relevant to this talk. And we're going to cover a lot of material in the next 20 minutes. And we're going to cover everything from who should lead radiologists in the 21st century. We're going to talk about some common myths about medical leadership. We'll talk about what great leadership is and what it isn't. We'll talk about when you should get started in leadership. We'll talk about why good leadership is the secret to the challenges and crises that we face in 2020 and beyond, and why it's the difference between having a great department or not, or having a successful practice or having a practice that folds. And we'll go as much as we can in 20 minutes, which is all I have, to talk about how you can become a leader. And I'll give you a list of things you might want to do if you want to get started on leadership, and I hope you do, because I'll repeat this at the end, but everybody who is on this call tonight and anyone who watches this on the recorded medium that follows has the potential to be a leader. And the RLI and the experts we've brought with us today and the experts that will be speaking tomorrow can help you do that. And it's just one approach to doing this, and this is one way we've tried to organize the material. Now, who should lead radiologists? And this is the first question, and unfortunately, it's controversial. and I've had some arguments with people, or at least spirited discussions about who should lead radiologists. And there is a school, and it's not unique to the United States. This is, the first time I actually heard this stated explicitly. It was in another country. But this notion that we should stick to our craft and we should leave the hard things, the business, the leadership work to other people while we focus on generating RVUs. And I like to call this, I have a name for it, and it's sort of this theory. And some of you may know what that is, but if you ever come to Southeast Pennsylvania, and that's one of the places where I live, my house is just about 20 miles away from where this picture was taken. And there's lots of good food to eat in the area. It was one of the areas where the locavore movement started. And that's actually an agricultural building. And in there, they're making mushrooms. And I just had to name it because we can't raise hands or do a call out here. But how do you make mushrooms? You keep them in the dark and you put manure on them. And that's kind of what this school is all about. This notion that, well, this leadership stuff is not really for radiologists. And I'm really of the second school, that we're elite professionals who actually do some things that are very difficult, very complicated, esoteric, and really you should be led by somebody else who's had to be there at 3 in the morning and make hard decisions. And there are other professions where people are only led by people like themselves. These are just 2 examples, and I've had some friends from medical school and some students I've taught who've been in these professions. And the tradition in the US is that every time one of these brave men and women goes up as an astronaut, there's somebody on the ground who's already been up there who helps with leading and making decisions. Same thing with fighter pilots. It's hard to imagine the people who do these kinds of dangerous things, the men and women who do that they would be led by somebody who doesn't know what it's like to be one of them. And I had a family member who did this, and I can't imagine him being led by somebody who hadn't been there themselves. And I think that's where we should be. And I realize that there's some controversy here, but it's one of the reasons why we work in the Radiology Leadership Institute, is so that we can lead ourselves. So move forward. A related question, and this is actually something that's a legitimate concern if you look at the business education literature, the business and management literature. If you get an MBA, this will be covered in some of your classrooms, is what's the rationale for leadership? The next 4 people you're going to hear from are all incredibly good radiologists, and they're very talented, highly trained professionals. Why do they need a leader? Why do they need somebody to tell them what to do? And probably all of you have worked with radiologists who either explicitly or perhaps subtly, let you know that they don't like being managed or they don't like being led. Why do we need leaders at all? Well, we need them for several reasons. One is that otherwise it's hard to get the group to work together. So it affects group performance, it affects issues of what's called group cohesion, and a good leader can help people work together. Also, you need somebody to be the face and voice of your group or department and be a liaison, whether that's to the hospital, the medical school, or other increasingly complicated institutions where we have to build relationships if we are going to succeed. And then they do a host of other things, and such as strategic thinking, managing conflict, financial planning, mentoring, and a long list of things that leaders need to do. Now, not all leaders are great. And I would bet that probably most people who are listening to this recording probably already have seen examples in their own career of people who aren't great leaders, but who are in designated leadership positions. So that's why I have great there as a word that's separated out from the rest of the sentence. Really great leaders are good at planning. They're good at trying to anticipate the future and preparing for it. They are good at managing individuals. And when you interview leaders, or if you just interview Wharton MBA students a few years after they graduate, I've seen the surveys because I was one and I was on the faculty and saw the surveys. They always say that the hardest part of being out there in their real worlds is that they have to manage difficult people. And that 80% of their time is usually handling people problems rather than doing financial engineering and strategic thinking. You also have to be a role model, and a key and good role model. And this is not an option. You have to be good at being a role model, or you aren't going to do well as a leader. And in my own leadership writings, I usually pick on US presidents because it's easier to pick on them, and I don't make enemies in the radiology community when I come up with examples of how to lead. And it certainly is not an option. Most presidents know this. Some of them get it right. We'll leave that at that. But you also have to be able to negotiate, you represent, build relationships, and sometimes resolve conflicts. And that's what you have to do as a leader. And so those are some of the things you need to work on. The next question is, how do you start? And what do you need to learn? Most of what we do in radiology, and most people end up in radiology, are good at learning, and people who generally like to learn, like to know things, like to be smart. And there is a curriculum. There are things you need to learn. And I'm in the middle of writing a paper with a good friend about the sort of nature and nurture components of leadership. And without going into details, it's clear that both are in play, but no one is born a natural leader. All of them still learn how to lead. And conversely, almost anyone can become a leader if they learn the right things and take the right path and are willing to learn. And so we have a curriculum. That's one of the things we do in the RLI. You then execute. You actually do things with your leadership skills and get things done. And even if you're not yet the chair or don't have a designated leadership role, there's still plenty to do. I bet everyone listening is in a place where something could be better, where things need to get done. So there are lots of opportunities to do that. And we'll also talk about some other things you need to do, like be a mentee and also be a mentor. And we'll talk about a little bit about networking and things like that that are basic skills that can help you start to lead and succeed. This is an example of a radiology curriculum. This is one that Anne-Marie Pascoe and I worked on. And some elements of this were incorporated directly into RLI, some have been modified, but these are things that leaders need to know. So while knowing things isn't all it takes to be a leader, if you want to be a good leader, you can't be clueless. You have to know things. You have to be good at strategic planning, as we said earlier, and being good with finances is good. You at least need to know how to read financial documents and understand it so that you can make sure that the people who are doing this full-time in your institution are getting it right. And as a smart radiologist, you will catch errors and you will see things that somebody who's purely in finance doesn't do. So this is very powerful information. You have to understand how the institutions work. You have to understand how we're regulated by the government and all the acronyms that go with that. You need to be a good negotiator. You need to understand how to brand and promote your radiology services and the value that we bring. You need to get the right job. And it doesn't stop with getting your first job. And I put that in there deliberately because many people in your generation may have more than one job over their career arc. And it's not unusual. And it also just isn't as simple as what the kind of advice that I got back in the day, which was just work really hard, publish a lot, get some grant money, and don't do anything stupid. And then you'll have a good career. That's all good advice, but that's not enough. And smart people manage their careers and set goals. And one of the things we're finding out from the burnout literature is that people who have control over their careers and have a plan tend to be happier than people who don't, who see it just as a workaday job, come in, knock the list down, get the LPs done, and go home. And that extends all the way out to your retirement. Some other things that you should think about in terms of a curriculum are understanding how we serve people, how to be professional. There are talks that are specifically on leadership per se, how we do accounting. I know that and economics don't sound like the most exciting things, but it's interesting how once it's your money, once it's your group's money or your department's finances, all of a sudden these things become very interesting. And radiologists often gravitate to this once they understand that this actually has applications in your world personally. We'll talk a bit about group dynamics and how groups can get along or not, and how you solve problems when they don't, and how to plan and how to work in the future, how to work on scenarios. Then a topic that I think is very interesting, and I've written on this with my friend Harry Jha, looking at problems that are very difficult, like wicked problems where you need to make lots of choices because there isn't a single right answer. Now, one of the first tasks, if you're going to take on leadership and try to succeed, is you've got to build a good team. And it's not just having great people. Great people are important, but it's also getting them to work together. And probably all of you have, at this point in your career, met people who are individually quite good, but who are not only not good team players, but they actually bring down everybody else's performance. This has been well studied in many areas, including the military and in sports, and over again, you see that it's overall, it's the best team that wins, not just the one that has the best people. Nice example from 4 miles from where I live in Pennsylvania. The school's won the NBA championship, NCAA championship several times. Not always with the best individuals, but with the best teams and people who are very good at working together. And again, team performance sometimes beats out individual talent, particularly when people can't work well together. And so that's just a local example. Now, when you lead a group, again, if you look at any business book, particularly the really bad ones that you find in airports, first chapter is always about getting the right people or getting rid of the wrong people, or at least fixing and optimizing the people you have. And since we can't usually hire and fire people quite the way that they can in the corporate world, a lot of it is about fixing and getting the right people on a team. Some of it's about norms and expectations. And again, whether you like it or not, leaders are role models. And particularly in areas related to what we promise to do with our Hippocratic Oath, as well as in other things like safety, quality, and operations. Leaders work on the right projects. And if I was going to give you some leadership advice for early in your career, is pick the right kinds of projects. Pick things that are important, ideally things where you have a little bit of time to work on them so that you're not always working on crises, but things that also have high impact. Things that are mission critical, those are things that are sometimes existential. The recent COVID crisis is an example of something that's absolutely mission critical. You have to fix it if you're going to be able to continue to work in this brave new environment. And it's a good way to develop leadership skills. It's also a good way to get noticed, that you're the person who can handle the tough things. So try to focus on things that are important and pick projects that matter. Because again, one of the illusions that I think we sometimes have is that leadership is a title, or you earn your leadership because you have a bigger CV, or you have this or you have that. But in the end, leadership is about the work that you do, and actually it's the verb, it's leading. And one of the ways you can do it early on in your career is getting involved in high impact projects. My interest in leadership stems from something that was basically handed to me because I was the most junior neuro faculty person at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania. And they wanted somebody to work on a multidisciplinary team, and actually it turned out to be high impact. That got me excited about it. One of the things I want to suggest that you might want to look at as we get to the close of this section is some things that you can do, if you're not already doing them, that will help you with developing leadership skills and also helping to succeed. And one of them is mentoring. And we can't do physical hand raises here, but if I were to ask, does everyone have a mentor? I would hope that all the hands went up. If I were to then extend the question and say, how many of you have more than one mentor? I hope all the hands would stay up. And I might even extend it further and say, how many of you have a mentor who's not in your institution? And isn't just everybody's mentor because they are the program director or the head of MSK. A mentor needs to be somebody who has a deeper and more profound relationship with you, and they have to be an experienced and trusted advisor. There's usually an age difference that's a result of experience. Age per se isn't what's important. What's important is having experience and using it wisely. For those of you who are interested, it's actually an eponym. I didn't really know that until I got interested in this material, but it's a character from Homer, and this was the person who taught Odysseus or Ulysses in the Roman version. And there's no substitute for this. I would predict, and you sometimes see people admitting this at the end of their careers when they're at their retirement parties or getting a gold medal, that none of us get here without having mentors, whether we acknowledge them or not. None of us do this solely on our own. I have mentors in my own life who I'm incredibly grateful for. And real mentors are hard to find. And when you find a good one, try to hold on to them for as long as you can, because there's no substitute. There may be good things about having life coaches or a psychiatrist or a personal assistant or a counselor, but it's not the same as having a mentor. Good mentors can do some of these things for you, but it doesn't work in reverse. And these are much more limited. Even if your spouse is a mentor to you, you probably need somebody else besides your spouse to be a good mentor as well. And in modern mythology, we just talked about something from Greek mythology, or at least from the ancient Greek writings. In a more modern time, this is a mentor-mentee relationship that maybe people of a certain age would relate to more, but certainly somebody who's much more deeply involved in your life. And what these people do when they get it right is that they teach you, not teaching you simple stuff like things to look for in the cerebellopontine angle, but teaching you about how to think about your career and how to succeed and how to move forward in difficult times. They help you, they look out for you, and they know you individually. And sometimes when I hear about speed mentoring, or I hear about people doing mentoring out of a book or out of a PowerPoint, if you can boil it down to a generic, then it's probably all great advice, but that's not the same as knowing someone and like a good friendship and watching out for them and giving them very tailored, personalized advice. That's a much deeper relationship. They guide you in making good choices. One of the hardest things about being successful is having lots of choices, but then trying to make the right ones for the right reasons. These are also people who go to the next step, and a more recent term for this is sort of the mentor on steroids, or the sponsor. This is somebody who actually makes calls for you, sends messages, open doors, uses their political capital, so to speak. You get on the phone and say, you really want to hire this person. I can vouch for them. This is somebody you really need, and putting your own capital at risk there. And also help you avoid doing stupid things in your career that put you at risk for blowing up your career. You don't want that. You also want to network. And again, with networking, it's one of these terms that as soon as people start using it, they misuse it. And there are ways to get it right, and there are things you can do that are wrong. Networking usually is a branching out structure where you start with people who are more at your peer. Your mentor is usually, again, somebody who's a bit more experienced than you. But networking usually starts like when people go to the AARP or they join the RFS of the ACR. And then it branches out and you meet a friend and then they introduce you to somebody and it builds out. You shouldn't, again, limit yourself to an institution or geography. You don't start with an ask. You don't say, hey, can you help me get a fellowship at a Southern California program? You first build a relationship before you ask for things. Smart advice just in general in life, but particularly true with networking, and this is in their literature, is that successful networking usually begins with listening rather than asking or talking. And people who are highly narcissistic, who just sort of talk about themselves, and somebody else tries to talk and they say, oh, that reminds me of me, let me tell you about me. That kind of a person, usually not effective networking. So listen, and try to also listen for ways that you can help them. And you can offer help and assistance, because again, this is a relationship and there's some reciprocity here, and it should be networking for the long term. And I can tell you, I've now lived through more than one rough patch in hiring in US radiology. That's what happens when you get this much gray hair. And I can tell you that the people who are good networkers do much better in downturns when they happen. And last slide here, we're just going to talk very briefly. I just want to, for those of you who don't know who we are, the RLI is basically, we're volunteers who are working to help you and providing non-clinical training at all stages of your career. We've got education and training programs. We've got a variety of formats, and we've got things for people at every stage in their career. As soon as the governor's let us, we're going to be doing live meetings again. But we've got online courses and webinars. We've got tailored programming, and we've got fantastic people like the ones who are coming up. And just want to close with our slogan in my last minute and just remind you that leadership's for everybody. Without going into all my nature and nurture literature reviews, most people can be leaders. And that was my experience for teaching at Wharton for almost 20 years. If you want to be a leader, we can help you do it. And I hope that everybody on this call wants to be a leader, because you're going to work in knowledge organizations, meaning that you're using your brain rather than your back or to do your work. And those kinds of organizations need multi-level leadership. So with that, I'm done, and I'm going to turn this over to one of our 4 stellar faculty and bring on Dr. David Boyd. And you can see from his side, I've already introduced him, so I'm going to let him get started. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexa, for the invitation and introduction, and thanks also to Dr. Diet. As mentioned, I'm in private practice in the DC area, private practice neuroradiologist, and I've been out of training for about 10 years. I work at Reston Radiology, which is the closest hospital to the ACR, and I'll be light on slides tonight to help save time for plenty of discussion. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So no disclosures tonight, except I'm a huge Washington Nationals fan. World Series champs. This was in the playoffs last year. I love the masks that all the patients wear. I got to get some of those. And I can't wait for the baseball season to start again. I've got a haircut. I'm ready to go. Next slide, please. So private practice, it's all about the value to your group. What you bring to the table is key to succeeding. Training, for instance, is very important. And what we found in private practice, for instance, for MSK radiologists, if you have training in ultrasound, that's a really nice niche to have, because that's a part of the practice that you can grow and that not a lot of people have experience in, not only diagnostic procedures, but therapeutic procedures. So whether you're just coming out of training or 10 years in the business, if you have that ultrasound, that's key. That brings a lot of value to the group. Experience, of course, is very important. Local ties and knowledge. It's really important to either know or learn about the competitive landscape of where you're going to practice. For instance, in the DC area, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of the different groups? What are their reputations? Where I work at Reston Radiology, it's more of an income group. We cover our hospitals 24/7 evenly, but we also put a premium on vacation, which is nice. Relationships with referrers, this is critical, and I'll get into this more. It's important to start working on this, building these relationships during training. Next slide, please. So conforming with the group, really important when you come in. You want to meld into the team. You don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. And you know, it goes without saying, do your fair share of the work compared to with everyone else. Reston Radiology, where I work, general skills are valued more than other groups. So for me, as a neuroradiologist, that meant brushing up on some stuff that I hadn't done in a while, like thyroid FNAs or stereotactic breast biopsies. But you know, these are skills that you can kind of brush off. It's not exactly riding a bike, but you can relearn them. And I found that my colleagues were real helpful when I come in on a day off, work with people who have a lot of experience in these areas, and you can get back into that, because you're two of our main offices, you kind of have to do everything. So it's important to have kind of a general skill base. It's important to get along. Don't be a problem child. I can't tell you how many behavioral problems in 10 years in radiology practice I've seen. Don't be one of them. Help out. You know, come in early, stay late. Help out with your colleague who's getting crushed by the ER list. Somebody's sick, you know, volunteer to help with their shifts. You know, it's really important to be a team player. And one of the mistakes I've seen people make that you should really try to avoid is don't go into practice and try to change everything, try to bulldoze. You've gone to a great institution, you know your protocols, and you want to take all your protocols and make wholesale changes without talking to the other people in the MSK section. It doesn't go well. Better off coming in, doing whatever protocols there are. Over time, make some minor tweaks or suggestions. 6 months in, a year in, hey, can we do this extra pituitary sequence? How about this? We'll keep it scanner neutral. I don't need the axial pre-contrast brain on this pituitary. So we'll keep the throughput the same, the scan time the same. You know, people are pretty receptive to that. So go in and be a team player. Don't try to be an individual hero. Next slide, please. Willingness to do tasks that others won't. Really critical, and I've found that helps you get promoted. That's kind of a fast way to leadership. Taking call, working weekends, nights, evenings. There are a lot of people in radiology who don't want to do this. So if you do that, you know, in a particular practice where that's valuable, that's good for you. It's also a great way to supplement your income. Reading mammo. For Reston, it's huge because we have two main offices. They're heavy mammo offices. You have to be able to do it. We have another hospital where everybody who goes there does diagnostic mammo, so you have to be able to do that. Not every group is like that, so use mammo as a placeholder. You know, in private practice, if you're an IR physician, read some cases when you're not doing IR procedures. If you're a diagnostic radiologists volunteered to learn and do some procedures, kind of do more than just your subspecialty. That's kind of the key. People will respect that, and they won't expect you to be perfect in mammography if you're a neuroradiologist, but they'll respect the fact that you work hard and try to learn and try to kind of get up to speed where the rest of the group is. Where I used to work, there was a heavy mammo shift in a faraway office, and I decided to volunteer for that, and that's really where I learned how to read mammo in private practice. Not only that, but because I went to that office that was far away and not a lot of people want to go to, that increased my value to the group and actually helped me get promoted. So these are some of the things you can think about. You want to be an asset to the schedule. You don't want to be a problem on the schedule. It's amazing. Some of my colleagues at Reston are some of these radiologists that can read everything, which is really hard to do. Prostate MRI, MSK MRI, neuro MRI, and then do a needle look. But these are the people in the corona crisis who are going to be first on the schedule. And so in a practice like mine, you want to be able to do as much as you can. So when a crisis hits like this and there are people who are going to be furloughed, you want to be at least in the middle. You don't want to be at the bottom as far as skills. So next, practice building, marketing, really important in private practice. I could go on and on about this, but suffice to say, it's critical to build and maintain these relationships with referrers. And it's really been critical during the corona crisis. What referrers want are availability. They don't demand perfection. In fact, sometimes they'll look at a case, they'll talk to you and be like, clinically, I don't think that. And you go, okay, I agree with you. You can make an addendum and change things. But what they want is you to be available. One way to do this, a lot of people in private practice don't call referrers because they think it takes too much time. I find it's invaluable. It's a great investment of time. You don't have to do it when you're busy. Do it in the afternoon when things are quieting down. But it's important to go over important findings with referrers, and they will appreciate that. I've never had a referrer say, don't call me, you're bothering me. And you start making those calls, you start building relationships, suddenly they'll call you about cases that maybe you didn't read, but they want your opinion on it. And then they'll call you about, how can I protocol this case? Should I do a CT venogram or an MR venogram? Ask for your advice. And you kind of build a relationship from there. And then they'll call you to fit in their stat case on Friday afternoon. So you help and work them get that case in by the weekend, and give them a call, even if you're not on call. If you're on vacation, no big deal. Pick up the phone, say, hey, look, I'm on vacation. I can't help you here, but I'll let my colleague know and get you some help right away. The availability is key, and that's how you build referrals. And was key in the corona crisis for our group to survive, frankly. Hospital committee involvement. Again, not a lot of people want to do this, but it's really a good use of time. At Reston, I volunteered for the stroke committee. We go over every TPA case where TPA is given every month. And it's a great way to kind of show cases. It's almost like you're in an academic multidisciplinary conference. You show the cases, you show the ER physician where the insula is, and the ICU folks. It's a great way to make relationships with neurologists. And Reston, where it's a big stroke center and they want to get bigger into it, they'll bring administration to these conferences and high-level administrators. So it's a great way to make those relationships as well. Medical society involvement, leadership in local national societies, the ACR, your state chapter. Again, a great way to get into leadership and to build referrals. Not a lot of people want to do this, again, unfortunately. So if you do it, you kind of really stick out in a positive light. I have to emphasize the state ACR chapter, which I've done for 10 years. It's been a great way to learn about the different groups in the area, to meet other group leaders. Most of the people in the leadership of the ACR state chapters are group leaders. So you learn about what's going on in your community. You learn about the different jobs that are available long before they're posted to the job sites. It makes your practice look good if you have a solid kind of leader in the ACR chapter. You don't have to have everybody involved in state chapter leadership, but if every group has one solid person in the state ACR chapter, it's a great way for the chapter to work well. You learn a lot of leadership skills, as an officer in a DC chapter. You learn about creating a budget, setting goals as president, leading discussions, compromise. These are all things that will serve you well in the rest of your career. Even parliamentary procedure, calling a meeting to order. I mean, I didn't learn any of that stuff in medical school, but now I feel like I have a pretty good handle, having spent some time in the medical societies. There's a medical society in the DC area called the Georgetown Medical Society. which is an alumni society of all Georgetown graduates who stay in the DC area. And there are a ton of them who went to medical school or residency and fellowship. It's a great way to build relationships with physicians in all different specialties. We have people like in news and media who give us talks, people from the White House. It's all talks that are non-medical, but can kind of bring the Georgetown community together. So it's a great way to keep up with people. It's a lot of fun, and it builds referrals, there's no question. Lastly, it's important to build your own brand niche, kind of like MSK Ultrasound. You want to be a go-to radiologist for referrers, fellow rads, and staff. You know, when you come back on a Monday, you want people to show you that brain tumor case because they care what your opinion is. That's kind of where you be, and that really helps you get promoted in your group. Right now, I'm working on building a lumbar puncture and myelogram practice in outpatient to help build business for the group because I've been able to do that previously. So thank you very much for your time.
Hi, so thank you so much, Drs. Lexa and Diet, for hosting, and thank you everyone on this call for joining this virtual session. I'm Lucy Spoluto. I am a faculty member at Vanderbilt. I clinically focus on breast imaging, and my health services research focuses on addressing health disparities. Next slide. Next slide. I have no relevant disclosures. Next. So I want to start by telling you all a quick story. One of the first things I had to do recently when I transitioned to working more from home during this COVID pandemic was to clean out the home office. And this is something that took more time than I would care to admit, but I did find a lot of really interesting things. And one of those interesting things that I found was these pens, the pens you see in this picture. So probably many of you are too young to remember, and honestly, I'm not sure if anyone even gives pens as gifts anymore, given how digital our world is today. But it used to be really popular to give nice pens, often engraved, as a gift to mark a graduation or another special event. Well, when I was going through my desk, I found these pens, and these were my grandfather's pens. And it made me to start to think more about my grandfather. And really, it made me start to think about what the heck happened on April 26, 1985, one of the dates engraved on these pens. And so when I thought about that, it made me start to think about the marks these pens have made and the marks that I want to make, that I want to be remembered by. Another thing it made me think about was my grandfather's beliefs. And I remember one thing he always said was that he didn't believe in luck. Instead, he believed in the intersection of preparation and opportunity. Next slide. So I think in academics in particular, it is incredibly important to think about this intersection. And really, more importantly, what you yourself are able to control within each of these entities. So within preparation, really, you need to excel at your clinical work and/or in your area of research focus. You need to have an idea or start thinking about where you want to go in the future. And you need to be aware of what opportunities might present themselves to you so that you can get yourself ready for them. Within the entity of opportunity, you need to create some opportunities for yourself. You need to position yourself in situations where opportunities may present themselves. So we heard a lot about networking, getting involved with your state ACR chapter, going to national meetings. That's where opportunities present themselves. While sometimes opportunities can come out of the blue, such as sitting next to someone who you don't know and striking up a conversation with them on the RSNA bus and then having them turn out to be a future friend and collaborator, which really happened to me. So sometimes it does happen out of the blue, but sometimes you have to create those opportunities for yourself. And then I think it's really important to recognize that when you're in a leadership role, it's not just about opportunities for yourself, but it's about the ability to create opportunities for others. And so I would offer that there's one additional important component that can make a huge difference. Next slide. And that is distinction. Really understanding what makes you unique and how you can leverage this uniqueness to succeed. And in leadership, going further, helping others to understand what makes them unique so that you can offer them the right opportunities. Next. I really believe that it's this intersection of preparation, opportunity, and distinction. This is the launch pad, the sweet spot for academic success. Next slide. Academic radiology is really full of opportunities to change your career trajectory, whether it's when you first enter academics, if you transition roles, if you switch from a more clinical role to a research role, if you start a new leadership role. And really, these transitions in academics are challenges for ourselves. When you're deciding if you're ready to make a career change, you're really asking yourself if you're up to the test, if you're up to the challenge. Next slide. So when a new opportunity presents itself, you have to ask yourself the question, are you ready to test yourself? So another just quick story on how I view the word test. Next slide. So I was recently at one of my son's Taekwondo testings, and this was pre-COVID, I promise, when larger group activities were allowed in person. And a few years ago, when I was at one of these testings, I probably would have found myself looking at my phone, checking my email, perusing the news, checking my calendar. But more recently, I've really tried to commit more to being in the moment and to learning everything I can from that moment. And this day was like a gold mine. I learned so much from listening to the instructor leading the activities. Her description of testing completely changed the way I think about the word. I always thought of a test as a bad thing, something that you're afraid of. But she described it not as a bad thing to be afraid of, but as an event. Specifically, this is what she wrote on the whiteboard, and it made such a big impression on me that I took a picture of it and I think about it all the time. She described it as a timely event stimulating transformation, which I thought was beautiful. And then she added the ing, which I thought made it even more important. A timely event stimulating transformation and inspiring natural growth. So really, these transitions that we face are tests, but in the transformative sense. They're opportunities to inspire personal, professional, and career growth. It's an opportunity to assess where you are, to recognize what it will take to make a change, and really, most importantly, to think about what it'll be like afterwards, and if you even want to go there. So then they moved on to the board breaking session. Next slide. So this is my son, and this is him looking at the board he's about to break. And this is where I always lived when I sensed a challenge or a test. So he's looking at it, he's thinking about it, I'm thinking about everything I need to do, all the forms I need to fill out. I'm going to turn this grant in. I have to fill all the forms out. I have to check all the boxes. I have to get all these papers signed. And you really live there in sort of that pre-phase. Next. And really, it's because you're thinking about this pressure point, this moment where the change is going to happen. You're thinking about how much it's going to hurt, how awkward it's going to be. Next slide. When really, you should be focusing all your energy here, on the other side, focusing on where you want to go and what activities you'll be performing once that goal is reached, thinking about the impact you can have once you've reached your goal. So the next thing I naturally did was to go out and break a board myself. You can ask anyone I'm in the GE SCARD lead program for women's leadership. We were able to break boards in one of our sessions. And you can ask anyone there how excited I was to do this. I was so ready that I think I broke the board before the master was even holding it up. If you've never broken a board, I highly recommend it. Next slide. So I think these principles are really applicable in many ways to transitions in academic medicine. Preparing yourself, creating opportunities, recognizing what makes you distinct, and really being willing to test yourself. So when you're entering academics, whether it be directly from training or through private practice or a different academic institution, there are a lot of challenges you face. When you're transitioning from training, it might be hard to get people to recognize you as a faculty member rather than a trainee. And you really need to think about what you want to look like as that faculty member. If you come from private practice or a different institution, you may have feelings of being behind. And I really got stuck here. I did transfer from private practice into academics, and I did feel behind. I felt like I was years behind in number of publications, grants, and I went and had a serious talk with my chair about this. And we talked about others who had made this transition and were very successful and are now chairs of academic departments. And that was it. We put it to bed, haven't thought about it since, and I've moved on. Other things that are important to think about are in academics. I think it's important to learn from everyone. Learn things that you like, people you respect, people you want to be like, but also take notice of things you don't like, things you don't want to do. Next slide. If you're transitioning to a research career, again, it could be directly from training, it could be from a clinical track or from a different academic institution. It can be incredibly challenging to feel successful in both clinical work and in a research program, to meet the expectations of both your clinical and your research colleagues. But much of this is self-driven. So again, you need to envision what you want your career to look like, what leadership positions you want to take, and what's important to you. Next. And if you're starting a leadership position, whether it's your first leadership position, or maybe your first leadership position outside the department, or you're transferring to a different academic institution for a leadership position, or maybe taking your first leadership position in a national society, you have to be willing to challenge yourself in new ways, to take a chance on new opportunities. And more importantly, once you're in that leadership position, you have to recognize that that leadership position isn't just about you. It's about creating opportunities for others, understanding what makes them distinct and helping them to prepare for new opportunities. Next slide. So I challenge each of you to be in the moment, to learn what you can in every moment, to push yourself and to think about how you can test yourself. And as a leader, think about how you can test others in this transformative sense, to challenge them to take on new opportunities. And most importantly, think about what mark you want to make. Next slide. So thank you all for your time. Looking forward to the rest of the speakers.
So thank you very much. My name is Rich Heller. You can go to next slide. And my talk is how not to consistently fail personal lessons in leadership. You can go to next slide. I have no relevant disclosures. You can go to the next slide. So when you think about great leaders, who do you think about? Do you think about Lincoln or Gandhi, Susan B. Anthony, or Oprah? Now, by the way, I recognize that some people, they might quibble with including Oprah in this list, but two comments. One, she's an icon and an unequivocal leader. And two, there's probably going to be a Chicago bias in this talk, so go ahead and get used to it. You can go to next slide. So what about Joe Exotic? Because Joe Exotic was a leader of sorts, even though, as we found out today, Carol Baskin got his old place. But he's probably not the kind of leader that you want to emulate. You can go to next slide. But what about me? Because I'm also not a great leader, and I'm not being modest. That's just a reality. I know some truly great leaders, and if I'm being honest, I'm not it. But, and this is an important but, I have a good idea of what great leadership is, even if it's not me. And maybe that's who it's helpful to hear from. You can go to next slide. So are great leaders born or made? Yes, but with the caveat that maybe they're born and they're made. You can go to next slide. So Michael Jordan. Again, I said there was a Chicago bias. There's going to be a Chicago bias. So Michael Jordan was born with an ability to be a fantastic basketball player. But what made him such an amazing, great, iconic basketball player was that he took that God-given talent and then he worked at it. Some people are just born with an ability to be natural leaders, and some people aren't. But the important point is, and you can go to the next slide, the important point is that like Michael Jordan studied basketball and became a much better basketball player, leadership skills are learnable. So whether you're born with an inherent ability, natural talent as a leader, or if you're like me and you're not, the important point is that leadership skills are learnable. So if you're born with it, great, you can get better. If you're like me and you weren't born with it, it doesn't matter. You can still learn these skills. There are things that you can still learn, that you can apply, that will help you. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about my own leadership adventures or misadventures. I'm going to do so through the lens of something called the Level 5 leader, which was described by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. So in the book, Good to Great, Jim Collins looks at companies that went from good to, well, great. And he analyzes companies and looks for commonalities. One of the commonalities he found was the companies that went from good to great tended to have what he called a level 5 leader at the helm. So what is a level 5 leader? You can go to the next slide. So Jim Collins defined what he thought a level 5 leader was. He said that they display a powerful mixture of humility and indomitable will. They were ambitious, but the important point is their ambition was for the cause. It was for the organization, for its purpose. It wasn't for themselves. They didn't want the corner office. That's not what motivated them. So if I'm being honest, it's not me. I kind of like the corner office. I want the office with the good view. You can go to the next slide. But maybe part 2 will help me. So level 5 leaders were often self-effacing, quiet, reserved, even shy. You guys have been hearing me talk for about 3 minutes. Is there anybody on this call who would describe me as quiet, reserved, or even shy? No. Next slide. But he said what motivated people wasn't their charming personality, which when you think of like the myth of the great leader, they've got this great personality. But what he found was with the data, that's not what motivated people. It was their standards. That's what a level 5 leader was. He or she motivated people with their standards, not with their sparkling personality. And you can go to the next slide. So when I think of in my mind, a level 5 leader, I think of Marv Levy, who was the football coach for the Buffalo Bills. And he led them to 4 Super Bowls in a row. You can go to the next slide. Now, when Marv Levy was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he gave his speech, and it's actually worth reading the speech sometime, because it's a textbook example. It's a master class in level 5 leadership. He thought of everybody he could thank, including his ex-wife. He remembered his friends from World War II, the ones that made it back and the ones that didn't. But he didn't talk about his own struggles, how hard it was for him. He told a story about starting at Harvard Law School, and he realized he didn't want to be a lawyer. He didn't want to go to Harvard Law School. And he called his parents to tell him he was going to drop out of Harvard Law School. But instead of talking about how hard that decision was for him to drop out of Harvard Law, he talked about his parents. And he called his dad and he said, "Dad, I'm dropping out of Harvard Law School because I want to be a football coach." And after a pause, his dad said, "Well, be a good one." And he talked about that support. He doesn't talk about his own struggles. He looked external to thank other people. That's level 5 leadership. Next slide. So if I'm being honest with myself, I'm probably not a level 5 leader, and I don't have it in me to be a level 5 leader. But I understand that level 5 leadership for lots of people, including myself, is aspirational. I may never be a level 5 leader, but trying to emulate one and understanding those characteristics can be very helpful, and it has for me. Next slide. So this is a picture of me with the artist Jeff Koons in a CAT scan room that Jeff designed, taken not long after I became chief of pediatric radiology. Not that far out of fellowship. How? Well, I'll be honest, it was a small children's hospital and we only had 2 peds radiologists. So I went to my colleague, you can go to the next slide, who was a lovely older gentleman. And I just asked him one day, "Can I be the section chief?" Because we didn't have one. And he goes, "Go for it." First of all, how long do you think it took between the time he said, "Yes, you can be section chief," for the time I added it to my email signature? And although I was now the chief, do you know where all the other pediatric section chiefs went when they had a question, when they had a concern? They went to Dr. Ramillo. But I thought I had the title. Now, I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I can learn. I had the title, which, by the way, my colleague cared nothing about, but it didn't mean I was the leader. Dr. Ramillo had built these relationships over many years. They knew that he cared about the institution. He cared about the children. He was the real leader, even if I have the title. A proof of what a great leader he was, he would refer people to me. He'd be like, "Go speak to my colleague, Dr. Howard. He's our section chief. He probably is a better person to handle this." He led by example. And to my own credit, I noticed that. He didn't care about the title or the corner office. He was the real leader. I was lucky to work under somebody like him who was a genuine level 5 leader. You can go to the next slide. So let's fast forward a few years. Our practice joined radiology partners, my own career is advancing, and one day they come to me and they say, "Rich, we'd like it if you would lead external communications." And I said, "Great. What is that?" So as an aside, for those of you that are paying attention to this, if somebody asks you to lead something and you have to ask what it is, You're not instilling confidence. If you're on your IR rotation and they ask you to cannulate the SMA and you say to them, remind me where the SMA is, yeah, they're going to take anything sharp out of your hands right then. But I was being honest. I didn't know. So I said, what is it? And they said it's like public relations. And you can go to the next slide. So do you all know what the first rule of public relations is? Because I don't. I have no idea. I'm a fellowship trained pediatric radiologist. I have no idea. I actually still don't know. Like, I have no idea. But I was honest with the team. We've got people that do communications, and this is what their background is in. It's not me. I led by trying to be honest, by trying to remember Dr. Romillo and recognizing that, look, there's things that I know. I'm a physician. There's things that I don't know. I don't know communications. But I know what I want our communications to look like. I know as a doctor what I want things to look like. And so I was able to communicate that. You can go to the next slide. And if I'm being honest, we've had a lot of success as a communications team, certainly not because I'm so good, but because frankly, we've got a lot of cool stuff to promote, like the Practice Wins Awards. We've got people doing great stuff. I didn't even know the metrics they followed. They're like, we need to track, earned media. That's like a big metric. What's earned media? Turns out it's like, how many, articles and stuff like that. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. We've got people who know that's a thing. It's not my job to know that's a thing. It is my job to help convey a message of what I want, our communications to look like. You can go to the next slide. So people do sometimes come to me and say, Rich, your communications team, you guys are doing great. And I'm very clear, first of all, don't thank me. It's a team. But they say, what's the secret to your success? And so, by the way, this is Chance the Rapper. Again, as I said, there was a strong Chicago bias. This is Chance the Rapper. And what Chance wrote was, don't believe in kings, believe in the kingdom. What I want is a unified belief in our mission. It's okay to question me. I have no problems with anybody questioning me. It's my job as a leader to make sure that everybody on the team believes in the mission. If they believe in the mission, then all of the other stuff, it kind of takes care of itself. You can go to the next slide. So this is me as a teenager trying my best to be Tony Hawk. By the way, it didn't work out for me. I went to Peds Radiology, but I tried. If I could go back in time, though, and give 3 pieces of advice to my younger self, you can go to the next slide. About leadership, this is what it would be. The first one, title is not leadership. Titles are given, but leadership is earned. People choose to follow you or not follow you. Dr. Mill was a wonderful example, and I was lucky to train under him and work under him and see what a real level 5 leader is like. Next slide. That even if you're not born a natural leader like me, or even if you are, you can still get better. The leadership skills are learnable. There's lots of great resources out there. One of them is Good to Great, a fantastic book. But the ACR and the RLI, they've got lots of wonderful resources out there for people to get better about their own leadership skills. And then next slide. And this may be the most important point. Even if you're like me, and you may never actually become a level 5 leader, knowing what it is and what qualities are most important and trying to be that person, it may not take you to the Super Bowl, but it will take you further than you think. Thank you very much. You can go to my last slide.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Heller, I believe in your mission. That was very inspiring. Thank you. My name is Ann Jay. I am a neuroradiologist at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. Thank you, Drs. Lexa and Diet, for hosting this session tonight. Next slide. Next slide. I have no disclosures, but I do want to say that my perspective tonight really comes from me working in a medium-sized radiology department, and my experience may therefore be different, very different and unique from yours. Next slide. So you guys are very lucky to have Dr. Lexa and the RLI. This was not available when I was training, and I have stumbled throughout my entire career. And I did not actually read a lot of leadership books. This is me stumbling through life like I do with everything else. Next slide. So hustle and grit are probably my two favorite words. It's actually on a little poster back here behind me. I think it's the best way to even be considered as a leader is to always be present. Like Dr. Boyd said, be the ultimate team player. I've actually known Dr. Boyd since he was a medical student, and I can 100% assure you that he has been hustling and working that hard since he was a medical student. Work harder than everybody else, not just for the glory, or not for the glory at all, actually, but because you care about honing your craft, becoming an expert radiologist, because you care about providing the best patient care, and because you care about your practice having value to your clinicians. Remember that we took an oath to be a physician. Next slide. And unfortunately, I have learned that even though you're really passionate about something, that does not mean that anyone will or should give you a chance to pursue that passion. We work in an environment in academic medicine with very limited resources and even less time. There is no Shark Tank of academic medicine. You have to be your own Shark Tank, and you have to be prepared to do a lot of hard work. A lot of times it's for free, and to fail at it many times before this passion becomes a reality, if it ever becomes a reality. Next slide. So equity and fairness seem like obvious qualities for a leader, but it's not always about making the rules the same for everybody. I found that the hardest thing I had to learn when I first became program director was understanding that the rules always have blurred edges, that people come to you with such nuanced details in their lives that rigidity just doesn't work with people. You need to think about the well-being of others, cognizant of the different stages they are in their lives, and the roles, the unique roles they may have in their individual families. When I was a resident, I was single and the end all be all, and my entire singular focus was on training. And that story really isn't the same story of my residents anymore. And I need to see that, I need to respect that, and I can't push my story and make it theirs. Next slide. But we also have to remember that equality is not equity. I know that this is a little risky, but what is currently going on with our Black community has really heavily weighed on my heart and mind, and I just wanted to say something about it. Racism is not isolated to police brutality. There is pervasive and systemic racism that permeates our healthcare system, from the low numbers of underrepresented minorities in medicine, particularly Black men, to the disparities of healthcare access and medical treatment people of color receive. We need to pay attention to what is at our doorstep and start making changes so that we can move the needle in the other direction. Next slide. So communication and transparency are really important because all eyes are on you. I'm the type of person where I just kind of put my head down, work really hard, and mind my own business, but I've realized that it doesn't work because people need to know why you're making the decisions that you are making. Many people are not going to understand or see all of the moving parts that you needed to consider before making a decision. So if you can, tell them. I have learned the hard way that if you do not communicate your story, others will be very happy to create your narrative for you. And a lot of times it's not in your very best interest. Next slide. So I don't know about all of you, but equanimity is very difficult for me. It does not come easy for me. I've always had a very overactive amygdala, which has an exceptional ability to react very quickly. And I promise you, it does not get you anywhere. My strong advice is just to get there. I don't care how you get there. If you have to go to one of those yoga retreats or whatever, I actually learned how to meditate. But learning how to give yourself the space to respond to a situation rather than reacting to it will save you from lots of mistakes. Next slide. As Dr. Alexis spoke about, it is really imperative to have mentors in academic medicine. I find that the mistake, though, that people really make a lot of times is that they only seek out mentors who are cheerleaders. It is really important to have a mentor that can be candid with you and tell you the things that are difficult to hear, but that you need to hear. It is particularly true if you lack self-awareness. Growth and change in your career cannot happen if you are stuck in an echo chamber that is fed only by empty accolades. Next slide. Drs. Lexa and Spoluto also touched about creating opportunities to others. I think this is probably the most important job you have in academic medicine, is to bring those up behind you. The best moments and only moments I really remember in my career are the ones when a student or trainee told me I made some sort of difference in their lives, no matter how small that difference was. I know this is totally cliche, and it's probably a testament of the fact that I'm getting so old, but I want to be remembered for the impact that I have on others, not for how hard I worked or how long my CV is. Next slide. So I ask myself this question every day, multiple times a day, because I know that once I let any of my work or whatever, and I get my validation from work, this is when I lose touch with what is important, what is the mission and the goal that I am trying to attain. Humility is the foundation of all virtues of a good leader. Be a good person. Don't take credit when you don't deserve it. Raise others up, and remember, everyone deserves kindness and respect. Next slide. But on the flip side, know your worth. Know how much time and effort and good work you put into your department or your section. You know, I think it's really important to be able to stick up for yourself and say something when you think that you're working really hard and you're being taken for granted, because that feeling of being taken for granted and underappreciated, that will erode in your soul, and you need to unpack that to take good care of yourself, right? But note that this is a very dangerous thing to be sort of wheeling around if it's not coupled with humility and also having a good mentor to guide you through the process. Next slide. So I added this slide at the very last minute. I think, you know, we all know these last few months have been really difficult for everybody. And what I've seen as I sat back and sort of looked at everything is that it's really brought out some really interesting sides of people, both good and bad. And what I've observed is that those leading with courage and equanimity were so much more inspiring than those who were trying to incite fear and create a culture of self-preservation. Be brave, be courageous so that you can inspire courage in others. Next slide. And lastly, your family and friends need to be your top priority. You are who you are because of them. Thank you.
All right, Lori, if you want to, oh, thank you. So I just want to thank the entire faculty for their great presentations. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion of tonight's session. Just as a reminder, you can submit questions through the questions pane or raise your hand, and we will get to you. To kick things off, Dr. Lexa, I'm going to pose a question. Yeah, if all the faculty can turn on their cameras, that would be great. I'm going to pose a question. You can direct it to the panel. The first one is, what is the best piece of leadership advice you got when you were in training?
Okay, well, if we're going to start with that one, why don't we go to Dr. Spoluto?
Sure. I think one of the best pieces of information I got was to be yourself. I think you can try to be someone else as much as you want and try to fit yourself into as many different situations as you can, but it's going to come out eventually. You don't want to be somewhere where they don't appreciate you for yourself. And I think it's important to, as Dr. J talked about, recognize your worth and recognize your own personal interests, and don't be afraid to be you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. While we're waiting for more questions, why don't we move down the list here? We'll go to Dr. Boyd.
Don't be outworked. I got that advice from Ann J. who's an outstanding leader, and I'm so happy to see her on this panel doing well.
Okay, and let's let Dr. Heller.
Sure. So the best piece of advice I got during training on leadership, they sat me down and they said, Heller, you're not going into IR. You're dangerous. And I said, okay, but luckily, no. It was good. It was helpful. So it was a good thing in leadership because it was like, look, know your skills. You're not good in IR. You're really not good. But it was an honest conversation. So you know what? Having those conversations about where you're good and where you're not good and being very honest with people, I thought it was actually very helpful. It was a good conversation to have. It was blunt, but it was honest.
Okay, well, thank you. And then we'll go to Dr. J.
I didn't get much, but I think the one that I always remember is bring up the rear. Is that when you get into position to help others, look behind you and bring up the rear.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm going to ask Anne-Marie Pasco to read. Looks like we have a question that begins with, what do you recommend? And I can't see the end of that. So can you read that?
Sure. What do you recommend for people who hold leadership positions in national organizations, but are content to be worker bees in their radiology practice? Does a leader have to be a leader in all that they do?
Excellent question. Do we have a volunteer?
I mean, I can jump in. I'm happy to jump in. So, you know, I think you want to be sincere in your leadership. So you want to lead in something you actually care about, and people notice that. So it may very well be that you want to be a worker bee. And I've had conversations with people that don't realize they're leaders. They're like, but Rich, I'm not a leader. Yes, you are. You're a leader in this world. People look up to you. Even if you don't realize it, people often look up to you. If you're really passionate about, again, pediatric radiology, breast imaging, whatever it is that you're passionate about, you probably naturally become a leader in that, even if you don't realize it. And so then that self-realization that you probably are a leader in that, and then how can you then work with that leadership position that you probably earned yourself, even if you didn't realize you've actually earned that leadership position, because that's your passion. You're a worker bee in, you know, whatever it is, pediatric radiology. Recognize that you are a leader in that, and that how can you then move what you care about? How can you move it forward? Because people are already naturally looking to you because of your dedication and your sincerity, and people recognize that sincerity.
And I'll add, it's something Rich actually said earlier also, is that it's not the title, it's how you act. So whether or not you have a title at your institution, you may have a title in a national organization where you're doing tons of work in that leadership role. You may not have the title at your local institution, but it's the way you carry yourself and the way you handle situations. It's being a leader all the time, the way you present yourself, whether or not you have the title and you're required to perform all the duties of that leadership.
Okay, great. We have another question here, and again, I'll throw it out for a volunteer. As leaders during the pandemic, like everyone, you may have had time to introspect into your work and personal lives. Moving forward, as things get back to normal, in ironic air quotes, what would you change?
I mean, I don't want to be the one who always jumps in first. As I said, I'm not shy. No, I think that one of the, I mean, you hate to use the phrase silver lining because it's been awful on so many fronts. But one of the things that I've been pleased to see is opportunities for leadership, opportunities for younger radiologists to step up into leadership opportunities, because frankly, there's been a need, right? There's been an incredible stress on radiology practices throughout the country. And so what we've seen is people that were not in leadership roles yet stepping up, often younger radiologists stepping up and helping lead. And I really hope that we're going to see that continue, that we're going to recognize that there were people that took on things that were not even asked of them. Like they just said, look, I can help with this. People took on duties that nobody said, we need you to do this. They took it upon themselves. And we've seen a lot of younger radiologists step up into leadership roles. And I've been very proud of that in our own organization. And I hope to see that continue.
Okay.
I would say that I would continue the virtual meeting so I can wear sweatpants and no one will know. But I will say, I think going off what Rich was saying was that we had to think out of the box. I mean, I would say that we had, only 20% or 10% of my residents in-house. And so we had to change. We had to really come out of our tradition. Like, medicine is just old and it's really hard to change, education, et cetera. And we really had to change all of those parameters, whether it was medical student teaching or whether it was the residents, in order to keep them accountable and to have their education going. And so I think learning how to be nimble and agile, and being ready for change and not falling apart, was a good test to take.
Thank
And
you.
I
Here's
think,
sorry, go ahead.
as we change, and I don't think we're going back to the way we were with any of this. I think there's a new normal going forward. I hope that we take this time to really look at this as an opportunity to improve the way that we were doing things. So as these new leaders emerge, maybe this is an opportunity to diversify our leadership, to change the way that things used to look for the better.
Frank, I would add, the pandemic's been great for me, spending more time with my family than I ever thought possible. I'm definitely going to do more of that once this ends, and my partners have said the same thing.
Okay, great.
All right. So here's the next question for the group. At this time of crisis, what strategies do you find more effective in leading your teams efficiently through situations that generate so much fear and conflict?
I
I
have
will say,
found,
oh, sorry,
go ahead, Anne.
I think, like I said, communication has always been very important, because I feel like a lot of times the residents or the medical students don't have a lot of information from GME or from the hospital. And so we would have all of these, like, twice or once a week meetings with leadership, and being able to disseminate that information and just keeping in check with them. I don't know if it helped or not, but I think just letting them aware. I think the unknown is probably the most unsettling part of everything, and just keeping an open line of communication, and I think was really important.
Totally agree. That's the same thing I was saying. I think the communication, and really remembering that communication is two ways: listening, understanding what people's concerns are, making sure their real questions are answered so that you can maintain transparency. I think, as Anne was saying, the fear of the unknown is the worst. And I think if you leave it unknown, people envision the worst case scenario. So by maintaining transparency and telling the truth about what the future really likely may hold, I think you can allay a lot of the fears that people have.
All right. Next question. How do you balance new involvement in leadership roles, research, and clinical responsibilities without spreading yourself too thin?
I spread myself too thin. I will tell you, when I became program director, I worked too much. I worked too hard, and it was I went through a really bad bout of burnout, and it was really hard to crawl out of that. And I alienated a lot of people in my family, not being the most. If you think about, and you sort of, when I think about what's the most important thing in my life, it's my family, being a mother, being a wife, and a good friend to my people, to my group, and that all kind of gave way. And I really it was tough. And I think, would I do it? I don't know. Because, when you have kids and like you do stuff with them during the day and all your academic time, you're like, all right, see, you put them to bed and you run downstairs to my basement office, and then you're like working all night because you have to make up for all the time you spent with your kids during the day. I don't know. It's really hard. It is really hard. Maybe it's okay to say no, and giving yourself a break and messing up and being okay with that.
All right. I'm going to combine two questions that are similar. How do you handle intimidation in internal politics from others when you take up leadership roles? You can't please everyone.
That's a tough, but I'll jump in first, because I think that's a very tough one, but it's very, very common. And I think it really is a matter of trying to focus on what your honest mission is. Like, and I was being sincere in that, like really focusing on what do you care about? And do I care about the idea that it was my idea, or do I care about the best idea? And I think that it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of liking an idea because it was your idea and not, wait a minute, is my idea really the best idea? And so trying to focus on and get people to understand, we need to be focusing on, we want to go here, what's the best way to get here? And it may not be your idea or my idea, it may be their idea, and trying to get everybody to understand that we're all trying to go in the same direction, we're all on the same team, we're all trying to get here, and any of us could have the best pathway forward. And that's very easy to say, and in my experience, has been very challenging to do.
Can I say something? I would like to say that, let's be honest here, not everybody is nice. You know, people just are not nice, and people play dirty. And, you know, when you're a leader, I feel like you just have to be above the board more than anybody else. And they just do bad things to you, and you just have to keep on the straight and narrow. But I think when you're I think you have to be authentic to yourself, because if you are not authentic to what you want to do or what your beliefs are, you know, you lose sight of, you lose sight of your path. So I think really sort of reflecting and being honest with yourself and bringing your authentic self to the game is most important.
I agree. This is a hard one. Like you said, not everyone is nice. And I think one of the important things I've learned is sometimes to just take a minute to listen to what people are saying and to not feel like you have to respond right away. Because a lot of times the first thing I want to say is also not very nice if somebody's not being nice to me. So to really kind of take a reflective pause and maybe even walk away. Maybe think about what you want to say, especially, you know, email, usually the first thing I write is not the right thing at all. But taking a minute, listening to what people are saying, trying to understand where they're coming from, and taking the time to put your thoughts together before you respond.
I agree with that. If you got a controversial email to write, it's better to sleep it off, and the next day you'll come back with something a lot better.
Yeah. And I think it's okay not to like everybody. You know, there's this thing where you're like, you have to sort of take care of everybody, and it's okay not to like somebody. I just don't think you should have these like very overwhelming feelings at work. If that's the case, then that person is invading your personal space too much emotionally. You need to be able to step back and look at it as sort of business, but you should give yourself space to understand you do not have to like everybody. It's okay.
We all like you,
There's
Ann.
a great book called Crucial Conversations. We had to go to there's a book and there's a seminar series called Crucial Conversations. And I'm sure some of you, know it very well. But if you don't, I found the book or the seminar really, really useful. And it's a book about having difficult conversations with colleagues. But to be honest, like the person who spoke about it was it was in a business setting. But they go, by the way, this is a business talk, but you're probably going to find it more useful in your interactions with your significant other. And yeah, that's where I found it most useful. Most applicable was conversations with my wife, for sure.
Okay, we're going to get at least one more question in, and one of the things we wanted to ask all of you as a challenge is, can we each get a quick anonymous example of bad leadership that you've seen during the time that you've had your own leadership journeys? We don't want names, we don't want finger pointing, but just to give people a sense, because you've just talked about great leadership. Let's talk a little bit in closing about times when leadership could have been better.
I think it's, and not to make it too much of an easy out here, but it's when you see the opposite of the things we were talking about. To me, it's the lack of communication. When a leader just comes down and says, we're going to do it this way, and that's the way it's going to be, which maybe is the way it needs to be, but they don't give any explanation, and there's no opportunity for the conversation beforehand, and there's no building of trust in the group for that decision to happen. So I think it's poor communication.
Great.
I totally agree. I would mention it's important as a leader, if there is bad news, to absorb it, but then to tell other people about it. Don't try to hide it. I've seen that many times, and I will say my current chair at Reston, he called me up before I started. He said, look, there's a guy who's leaving. You're going to get a little less vacation. You're going to work harder. And I really appreciate him doing that.
I will say that in my experience, I have learned more from bad leaders than from good leaders. From seeing like, wow, I don't want to be like that person. And an example would be, I didn't believe that they were genuine. They would say, for example, things like they want real feedback. They did not like feedback. If they wanted you to lead something and come up with an answer, they would tell you in advance what the answer was. So their leadership was not genuine. They were not sincere. And when I didn't trust somebody, when I didn't believe what they told me, that was a problem. And so in my own leadership, I tried to make very, very clear that I need to be honest, I need to be sincere. And so having seen somebody not do that was a very valuable lesson for me.
I think I'm scarred for life for having bad mentorship. And so anytime I think I'm overthink about it, so that when I have any younger person than me, I just think about how I never, ever, ever want to do that to another human being ever in my life. So that's what I learned from that.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask Anne-Marie if we have time for one more question.
Sure, let's do one more. How do you develop the group will to change when so many are happy with the status quo?
You can't, maybe. I think you have to, if you change, you have to really think about who your stakeholders are, and then you're going to have to work really hard to try to turn over those stakeholders. But you're going to know that anytime in change, there's going to be the early adapters, the sort of medium people, I don't know the exact word, and then the laggards in terms of accepting change. But you really need to get your key stakeholders to believe in you. And there are many times when I have not been able to get the stakeholders to believe in what I was going for, and therefore my project never happened. So.
Okay.
I mean, I would only say to anybody listening who's has that same question, which to echo what she said, there's a lot of great stuff written out there on change management. You can Google change management because there's some wonderful steps written out there, like you just said, like trying to find local champions and implement small steps, like find a local champion, go for the small win. But again, with my experience, it's always easy to read about and then very, very hard to do it in real life. But not impossible, but you should not think it's going to be easy or painless.
Any last thoughts about that? All right. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lexa in a minute to share some closing thoughts. But first, Lori, if you could go to the next slide. I want to give you two reminders. The first one is be sure to join us tomorrow for part 2. Tomorrow's focus is going to be it's a shared responsibility, organizational and individual strategies to promote well-being. We have a great panel lined up for you, so please join us tomorrow. The second reminder is you will receive an email with information about how to claim your CME credit. You'll probably get the email by Monday. So if you don't, feel free to contact us at the RLI and we will help you out. Another reminder is a recording of this session and also tomorrow's will be posted and available probably by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So be on the lookout for that. Dr. Lexa, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close us out.
Hey, thank you, Anne-Marie. And I'm going to start by thanking you and your team for putting this together. I want to thank all of our faculty. As I said, that we're all volunteers and we have 4 incredibly busy people who've I think given you fantastic advice and great examples of how to be great leaders and to be like them. And so I want to thank them and also thank you as the audience for listening and participating. Great questions. And we hope this helps you on your own leadership journey. So thank you. And we look forward to seeing you at a future RLI event. Thanks again.